a wonderful, wonderful place to visit this summer, to bring your children, to learn our history, to be uplifted by inspirational stories, but also understand how difficult and powerful it all was. And Bob joins us this morning on the show. Bob, good morning.
What's up, DA? Man, it's good to see you, and thank you for having me on the show.
My pleasure. No one else I'd rather have today. Great to see you as well. You can watch Bob at watchda.com of the simulcast, also on our Twitch channel for CBS Sports Radio. That is also mobile friendly. So let's start with Jackie, the ball player. Jackie had to be a really good ball player because they didn't want to bring in a guy that was just going to be mediocre. In terms of his baseball playing talent, why was he chosen to be the guy?
And honestly, DA, when you talk to the players who knew him from the days in the Negro Leagues, that was really the thing that concerned them the most, was whether or not Jackie had played enough baseball. He hadn't played a lot of professional baseball. Jackie joins the Kansas City Monarchs in 1945. Now, he had played a little military baseball, and of course, he played collegiately at UCLA, but he didn't have a lot of baseball under his belt from a professional standpoint. Now, he has an amazing season with the Kansas City Monarchs. And so as the Dodgers are scouting him, I think they saw enough in him that said, yeah, he can play. And of course, we're talking about one of the greatest athletes in American sports history. But when I share with our visitors here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum that baseball was Jackie's weakest sport. Now, he's a much better basketball, football, track athlete than he was baseball player, and some say an even better tennis player. It blows them away, and he turns himself into a Hall of Fame caliber baseball player. But yeah, that was the biggest concern, was whether or not he had played enough baseball.
Imagine that being his worst sport. That's what a great athlete Jackie Robinson was. I always found it was interesting. He breaks the color barrier and wins Rookie of the Year. 2 years later, he's National League MVP. Now, those are voted on awards. I thought, boy, you would think there might be some resistance from white sports writers to not give him accolades right away. Was he so great that they had to reward him, or was the baseball media actually not as resistant to black ball players as maybe American society at large?
I think it's a little bit of both. I do think it's a little bit of both. Now, you still had some who were staunch in their mindset in terms of segregation, particularly over at the Sporting News and places like that. But I think by and large, what they saw was a great baseball player. And I tell people all the time, DA, that the beauty, and maybe perhaps this is the innocence of a child. When Jackie Robinson breaks into Major League Baseball and he starts having success, what did we see? We saw white kids saying, I'm Jackie Robinson, because they didn't see Jackie Robinson, the black baseball player. They just saw Jackie Robinson, a baseball player that they admired and wanted to play like. And to me, that is the beauty of a child and seeing life through the eyes of a child, where other people saw just the color of his skin, but he won them over. And as I listened to you just before I joined you and talking about how he had to have this high moral standards and character to do what he did, to be the chosen one, you had to be somewhat of a model citizen. And when you look at what was happening in Major League Baseball at that time, they weren't exactly model citizens, but that first black guy had to really live up to those super high standards to be accepted.
Bob Kendrick joins us. He's the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum on the day that Jackie Robinson, 75 years ago, broke the color barrier. Nobody is a perfect human being, but they had to find somebody who was pretty close, because he had to be great at baseball, not good, great, to validate this, quote, experiment. They had to find a guy of high moral character so that he didn't get into trouble off the field, because that could have derailed the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And they had to find somebody who was strong enough to take insults but not fight back. I mean, it's just kind of an impossible combination to come to. How much does that speak to just how Jackie was a really special human being.
I think it speaks volume to the fact that Jackie was a really special human being. There weren't many that could have done what he did. And to make it even more special, because to be honest, DA, this was out of character for Jackie to take the abuse. As Buck O'Neill would describe him, he was a natural born fighter. As Buck would say, Jackie could duke and would duke. He'd knock you on your rump. But he humbled himself for the greater good. And I think that took an immense toll on him, as well, as you can well imagine. When you're not accustomed to behaving in a certain way, and then all of a sudden you're put in an environment where you've got to be something that goes totally against your belief, and you willingly accept that. That's just how special Jackie was. And I think he understood that he was doing something that was bigger than himself. And that was, I guess, in his mind, a small price to pay. But as we know, it was a tremendous price that he paid.
There were better ball players. I mean, Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, superstars of the 40s of the Negro Leagues. Some people thought Monty Irvin could be the guy. He seemed to be the next superstar as a black ball player, but they chose Jackie. Was there ever any resentment within the black ball playing community that Jackie was the chosen one?
By and large, not. But Satchel was hurt. Yes, Satchel was hurt. Satchel was a teammate of Jackie. I don't know if you can see the gold frame photograph right behind me. That's a picture of Satchel Paige and Jackie Robinson when they were teammates in 1945 with the Kansas City Monarchs. And you have to understand, DA, Satchel Paige, in many respects, was the Negro Leagues. He was the Negro Leagues' biggest star. And so in his mind, he should be the guy. But there was no way they were going to take Satchel because it was so easy for the owners to say he was too old. We don't know how old Satchel really was. And then I think Satchel was also a little too charismatic. You couldn't bring that level of charisma, that level of what the major leaguers would call showboating into this game, because that was going to be frowned at. And then the other thing that you had to be very careful about is that it was too great a risk that a pitcher might fail. And the first guy cannot fail, because if the first guy fails, there is no second guy. Yeah, no, they were waiting for failure, because now I can say, well, see, I told you they weren't good enough to play in our league. But if Jackie can't take the abuse, the naysayers were going to say, see, I told you they couldn't handle it. So Branch Rickey had a double difficult task of identifying the right guy, because failure was not an option on either side of the equation.
What was the pie chart like in terms of owners that wanted to integrate but needed to wait until somebody else did it, like the Dodgers, versus owners that said, over not my dead body, I hope this fails because we should never have to integrate?
And I think you had a mix of the two, because there were major league owners who had been tinkering with the notion of integrating well before Branch Rickey made the move. The timing, as they would say, was not right, and there was a fear factor. You knew you were going to be ostracized by your peers. But Clark Griffith wanted to sign Josh Gibson and Buck Leonard in the early 1940s. Why? Because he saw Leonard hitting line drives all over his ballpark in Griffith Stadium, playing a dazzling first base, and he's watching Josh Gibson hit balls where no mere mortal had ever hit them. And he knew that if he signed those two superstars to his Washington Senator team, they instantly jumped into contention to win a pennant and would have a possibility of winning a World Series. But the other factor was Clark Griffith was watching all these black folks fill up his ballpark there at Griffith Stadium. And if he breaks the color barrier and ultimately puts the Negro Leagues out of business, he's going to lose that source of revenue. He's getting a percentage of the gate and likely all of the concessions. See, that had as much to do with keeping these players out of the major leagues, because the major leagues were making money from the Negro Leagues. So teams like the New York Yankees and the Washington Senators, even in Chicago, where the Negro Leagues were renting Comiskey Park, That was part of why it took so long. This was a moneymaker for a lot of major leaguers. And man, they didn't have to work that hard to get that money. All they had to do was sign on a dotted line. We've got a piece here, a wonderful piece. It's called the MacPhail Memorandum. And when they were, Mayor LaGuardia was starting to really put a lot of pressure. And they were looking at Major League Baseball about exploring his hiring practices. And he puts together a commission, and Larry MacPhail, who was the managing partner of the New York Yankees, was on that commission. And he writes LaGuardia this memorandum outlining why integration is such a bad idea. And he goes through a litany of reasons, none of them really valid, but he finally gets to the crux of the matter. In 1945, the New York Yankees made $100,000 off the Negro League. They didn't want to lose that. $100,000 in 1945.
Yep. That's so the reason.
I tell people all the time, anytime they say it ain't about the money, it's always about the money.
Bob Kendrick is the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Why is Jackie's story 75 years later today still important?
Because Jackie Robinson's breaking of Major League Baseball's color barrier wasn't just a part of the civil rights movement. It was actually the beginning of the civil rights movement in this country. This is 1947. This is well before those more noted civil rights occurrences. This is before Brown versus the Board of Education. This is before Rosa Parks' refusal to move to the back of the bus. As Buck O'Neill would so eloquently say, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a sophomore at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, when Jackie signed his contract to play in the Dodgers organization. Our very own Harry S. Truman, right up the road from the museum in Independence, Missouri, wouldn't integrate the armed forces until a year after Jackie. So for all intents and purposes, this is what started the ball of social progress rolling in our country, baseball. And for us, it's important because we want the world to also know that this just didn't start the day he took the field with the Brooklyn Dodgers. It started here in Kansas City in 1945 when he joined the great Kansas City Monarchs. So it was indeed the Negro Leagues and the great city of Kansas City that gave America arguably its greatest hero in Jackie Robinson. So we should never forget Jackie Robinson, but we should also never forget the league that gave us Jackie Robinson.
The Negro Leagues Baseball Museum is such a wonderful place. It's uplifting, it's powerful. It can be frustrating at times to see where we were, but enlightening to see where we are. It's warm, it's inviting, it's great for kids. It's such a good vacation spot this summer when the kids are off of school. What do you guys have going on at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum this summer if families drop by?
Yeah, no, we got a lot of great things happening even today with the ceremony of unveiling a historical marker that was at the birthplace of Jackie in Cairo, Georgia, that you may have heard the story that was last year. It was defaced when someone shot gunfire into the historical marker. Major League Baseball stepped in, replaced the marker. The Georgia Historical Society sent it to us and asked if we wanted to have it. And the answer was absolutely yes. And we will unveil that marker because to me, it is a perfect reminder of the enduring legacy of Jackie Robinson and the fact that there is still a lot of work left to be done. And this is the place for those very difficult conversations to emanate. And so we will unveil that historical marker. It will be permanently displayed at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. We're celebrating, of course, Buck O'Neill and his impending induction into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And as this pandemic seemingly is loosening its grip to some extent, we're now able to start planning events again and our summer hot dog festival. And man, I'm telling you now, come out and join us for the hot dog festival. It is incredible. And you know, I can't go to a baseball game. They got all this fancy food down when you go in, and I don't want that. Just give me a hot dog.
That's right. Keep it basic. Keep it basic. That's so cool. If you can get to the museum this summer, I highly encourage it. Even if you can't, listen to Black Diamonds, which is a podcast hosted by Bob. It is an excellent look at the stories of the Negro Leagues and how it affects players today. Most recently this week, Mookie Betts and Tim Anderson on the legacy of Jackie Robinson. So you can check that out all places that podcasts are available, including Apple Podcasts, hosted by Bob Kendrick. Bob, it's always great to see you. I'm so glad we got to have you on the show today. Enjoy Jackie Robinson Day, and I love talking to you.
Hey, same here, GA, man. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you having me on the show.